Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the fourth and final day of GEF Live. We are so glad to have had you the past week, and we invite you to tell us some of your favorite moments, where you're coming from, and what your favorite moments of the past few days have been. But in the meantime, I'm honored to be joined by Juha Uitto, who is the director of the GEF Independent Evaluation Office, and he's been involved with the GEF for 20-something years, and he came to this position from the UNDP. So welcome, Juha. It's been a fantastic, fascinating, and I'm sure challenging few days. But before we get into what happened this week, could you tell us a little bit about what the Independent Evaluation Office at GEF does and what your message to the Council is this year?
Okay, thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here and to see you again and chat. Well, the Independent Evaluation Office, as the name says, it's an independent office, and we're actually in a very fortunate position, I would say, because we're an internal but autonomous unit. So we report directly to the Council instead of management or whatever. So we have lots of freedom of doing evaluations at different levels. Nobody's going to tell us that you should not be looking at that and so forth, and that's great. So what we do basically, we have a accountability role in that sense, that we look into whether the GEF has actually achieved the results and the impacts that it was set out to achieve, and whether the programs and the projects are sustainable, whether they are leading to transformational change, how we address environmental issues and so forth. But we also have a very important role in learning, in learning lessons from the past, in analyzing what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how could the GEF improve its performance. So that I think is a very, very important role for us. That it's not only about what happened in the past, but it's also about how could we do things even better in the future.
That is an important and exciting role, and particularly important because you have the luxury of kind of the broad view of the activities related to the global environment. Based on that view, what are you most optimistic about for the year ahead?
Well, we live in difficult times, and there are lots of things that could bring you down in some ways. And we know about the climate negotiations, and we know about the actions that countries are taking regarding limiting greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. That they do not necessarily at the current level don't necessarily add up to what is needed. At the same time, I think things are changing. I think that's a positive thing. So there are more groups and people who get together. Next year is going to be this super year 2020, where really action is supposed to be geared up. But I think that one of the most important things is that I think really the attitudes are changing, and there's a generational difference. I think the young people have different values than us old geezers tend to have, and we always calculate everything in terms of it's impossible because it costs money. But there are more important things, obviously, and young people, I think, are bringing very important changes to how we see things and how we see global environmental issues.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there's a generational difference. And speaking of which, most of our audience today is young people. If you could look them in the eye and give them a message, a takeaway, an action item, what would it be, Juha?
Well, one of the things I would say is that we live in very divisive times, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation floating around, and ideological differences between what should be be doing and so on. As an evaluator, I would say that one of the most important things is that base your decisions on the available evidence. It's not only what the evaluations say, although the evaluations may say quite important things, but it's also, you know, there is something called science. And science actually has shown quite clearly what some of these issues are when it comes to biodiversity loss, climate change, land degradation, chemical pollution, and so forth. So go by the evidence. Don't go by just emotions or political arguments or so forth. And when you go by the evidence, so then you can chart a path towards what should be done actually, and then keep your politicians accountable. Talk to them, to engage. Don't give up. It's easy to say that, okay, we've gone too far and now we can't do anything anymore, but that's not very constructive. We have to do something if humanity is to survive and thrive in the future. So engage based on the best evidence that is available.
Absolutely. There's so much power in data, and we have the luxury of data, so use it, right? Thank you so much, Juha. It was an honor to have you here with us today, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another one.